that can be dangerous. Good evening. I'll call to order the Arvada City Council workshop for April 11th, 2022. Call upon Kristen Rush.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Jones. Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Here.
Councilmember Marriott.
Here.
Councilmember Mormon.
Here.
Councilmember Simpson.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Mr. Pfeiffer.
I move to excuse Councilmember Jones from tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Motion is to excuse. All votes are cast. That passes 6-0. Mr. Jones is hereby excused. Mr. Devon, we've got 2 workshops this evening. You want to lead us off?
Yes, the first will be the update on the sub-area plans with Square Lake, and I believe we're going to have Ryan Stachelski introduce this item.
Good.
All right. Good evening, Ryan Stachelski, Community Economic Development. I'm just here to introduce Patty McCarthy. She's our senior long-range planner. She's been with the city just over 2 years, and she's been coordinating this plan with Adams County. So she'll give you an overview.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Williams and council members. Tonight's presentation is an update and also the opportunity to present the draft sub-area plan for the Square Lake area. Next slide, please. Do I have the ability? I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. The comprehensive plan was adopted in 2014 and includes elements of the 2007 Arvada Transit Station Framework Plan. The plan articulates the community's shared values and vision and includes policies and goals to help guide the development of the city to accomplish that community vision. The Square Lake Sub-Area Plan will further implement the comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. Sub-area planning focuses on targeted areas around the city and these specific geographic areas where we could create goals and policies for topics such as land use, transportation, and design, and others. Sub-area plan also helps to create a long-term vision for future development and redevelopment in these areas. This process included community participation and input opportunities through stakeholder committees, including Planning Commissioner McGee, community meetings, workshops, and surveys. Next slide, please. The Square Lake Sub-Area Plan is a collaborative project with Adams County initiated in 2020. It was initiated in response to community and neighborhood concerns in the unincorporated areas, regional transportation challenges, and challenges of homelessness within this area. The city plans applicable to this project are the Comprehensive Plan, Arvada Station Transit Framework Plan, Imagine Arvada's Park and Trail Plan, and Clear Creek Corridor Plan. Community engagement included 5 technical advisory committees meetings, 6 stakeholder advisory committee meetings, 1 virtual and 2 in-person community open houses, and 1 virtual online community survey. The plan was approved by Adams County on February of this year. Next slide, please. This area is partially located within the city of Arvada and unincorporated Adams County. The study area is bounded on the north by 60th Avenue, 52nd Avenue to the south, Sheridan Boulevard on the west, and Tennyson Boulevard on the east. Land use patterns within Arvada have not changed. The study area was geographically generalized into 3 character areas: the G-line area, central, and southern areas. The G-line area is located completely within the city of Arvada and includes the Gold Strike Station and RTD parking lot. The existing uses are residential, light industrial in addition to the station, and there is minimal east-west connectivity throughout the area itself, not including 60th Avenue. There are no significant changes from Transit Framework Plan within this proposed plan. The central area is located both within the city of Arvada and Adams County. This area is located between south side of the G-line tracks to the south to I-76, and it is both primarily on the south side of the tracks is the city of Arvada location. There are currently light industrial and heavy industrial uses within the area. A significant portion of the area is within the floodway and has impacts that create undevelopable areas. And there is no direct connection to the station from the southern area to the G-line area and from the central area. The southern area is located in Adams County and is probably the most diverse as far as uses. Includes a large area of mobile home park for residential, commercial, and industrial uses in this area. And that area is located south of I-76. Next slide, please. The plan has identified priority plan recommendations, and these are generalized into 4 categories. First, preferred future land use scenario. Secondly, complete streets. Thirdly, parks and open space connections. And finally, environmental mitigation. The first preferred future land use scenario is on the north side of the tracks, which is within the city of Arvada, is mixed use residential and mixed use. South of the tracks for the city of Arvada portion, the preferred uses are industrial office and industrial. The complete streets component of the plan is conceptual only in design to provide guidance for the perimeter streets for this plan. These streets include Sheridan Boulevard, 60th Avenue, Tennyson Boulevard, and 52nd Street. Complete streets are designed to operate and enable safe access for all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and transit riders of all ages and abilities. The city has planned street improvements for the east side of 60th Avenue, and the sub-area plan identifies additional conceptual design alternatives along Sheridan Boulevard and Tennyson Avenue within the city of Arvada. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, do you mind going back? I apologize, back one. Can you? Thank you. Okay. So the parks and open space connections are intended to improve connectivity to nearby parks, open space, and trails. The recommended improvements for these park and open space connections include pedestrian, intersection crossings, street crossings, and trail design improvements. The fourth component of the sub-area plan recommendations includes best practices in environmental mitigation as it approaches to be considered for future improvements, development, and redevelopment within the sub-area plan area. Next slide, please. The Square Lake sub-area plan also includes plan priorities, and these that are listed are more specific to the city of Arvada. The first plan priority identified is transit-oriented development on the Gold Strike Station site. This again is the slide shows a plan on the far left bottom that is a conceptual alternative for future redevelopment of the RTD site. The transit-oriented development plan also identifies this area as a mixed-use community within walking distance of a transit stop that mixes residential, retail, employment, open space, and other public uses. The Gold Strike Station access is another plan priority, and this is to improve access and connections to the station from various directions, from the north, south, east, and from the east to the west. And those are included in a more detailed plan in a detailed map within the plan. Ralston Road and Sheridan Boulevard intersection was a strong consideration and a very important priority for this plan area for both the city of Arvada and Adams County. There is a short-term intersection reconfiguration and a long-term connectivity concept that is shown on the slide and within the plan to improve Ralston Road and Sheridan Boulevard intersection. And finally, there were proposed not proposed, but identified plan priorities for the Sheridan Boulevard underpass improvements and pedestrian connections at I-76 within the sub-area plan along Sheridan Boulevard. The priority projects developed through this planning effort were through stakeholder and community feedback, as well as technical committee and project team expertise. Transportation-related projects of the plan are focused on creating safer and more direct connectivity for all users and modes within the area. Next slide, please. In more detail, the near-term intersection reconfiguration for Ralston Road intersection is to help short-term potential concept to get more queuing distance from Sheridan Boulevard as you go east into the central area of the plan. If you look underneath on the first near-term intersection reconfiguration, you can see that the current configuration 58th Avenue is basically functions as a frontage road for Sheridan Boulevard and does not allow adequate queuing distance from Ralston Road, Sheridan Boulevard intersection. The long-term connectivity plan concept was to continue Ralston Road as an east-west connection all the way through the central area from Sheridan Boulevard to Tennyson Boulevard. Then in addition, including a northwest connection through the central area and reconfiguration of West 58th Avenue. Next slide, please. The Square Lake Subarea Plan has identified implementation strategies as well for each jurisdiction. That is included as an appendix in the plan, and the City of Arvada is identified with 10 priorities, including Adams County. The recommendation priorities of the plan were intended to be specific yet flexible so that each vision can be achieved. The first column shows the recommended priority order of each implementation. The second column identifies the action item, and those were organized by jurisdiction and then ordered by priority from the project team and committee members. The character area column identifies the general location of the action item as throughout the sub-area. And the fourth column includes key stakeholders where suggested responsible parties are listed to identify potential champions and partnerships. The last column shows anticipated timeline for each action item. The timeframe column anticipates how long that may take to fully complete the item, however, does not prevent the action item from being started or finished at an earlier or later date. Next slide, please. The next steps are to present the final Square Lake Subarea Plan for a Planning Commission public hearing on May 17th and City Council public hearing on June 20th. Pending holiday, I believe there's a holiday potentially planned that day, so it may be extended a little bit later for City Council. This concludes my presentation. Did you have any questions?
City Council questions. I have a comment.
Okay.
One of the issues that I know is going to be coming up down there, and you're looking at some transit-oriented development in terms of residential. You know, Industrial Chemicals has been a long-time company, and I saw that their president was on the committee that was involved in all this. Mm-hmm. What I don't want is a Stapleton Airport scenario where we start bringing in a bunch of housing, and then they say, well, now that we're here, we don't want, you know, that long-time business, which is a beneficial business, kicked out. So what steps are we taking to make sure that doesn't happen?
Within the plan itself, it discusses that for those use areas, and it's actually the mixed-use areas, as you read the descriptions in there, identifies that it's intended to retain those industrial users.
Great.
It's recognized as an important business and also an employment opportunity for the TOD area.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of the Square Lake area is actually being looked at as an employment center, right?
That's what Adams County would like to see in their
happen.
areas, especially in the central area. They're
Yeah.
trying to get it way more, their direction for the plan, as you can see on the land use scenario, was employment and mixed use within the central area.
That's going to take a lot of work to get it out of the floodplain, though, right?
Yes, so
'Cause
that
that's,
currently a lot of it is undevelopable because it is in the floodway. If it's in the floodplain, there's alternatives for
But
development.
floodway,
But
so-
a majority of it in the darker blue of the map is floodway.
Very
So
good.
there are some significant challenges.
Okay, Mr. Pfeiffer?
Of course, you know, I get excited. I get a lot of complaints around the intersection at 58th and Ralston, and you showed a near-term and a long-term solution. I mean, it's maybe unfair of me to ask, but how long till the near-term solution can get addressed?
If you notice, it's within Adams County primarily,
Yeah.
and it requires coordination with CDOT and a lot of funding. So we're hoping that this plan kickstarts that discussion. We actually had quite a few conversations with CDOT, and they recognize it as well. So until funding can support that, and maybe Ryan can add to this question as well, it is important to both Adams County and the city of Arvada.
Yeah, it's just not
There's no
functioning
immediate
very well.
funding that I'm aware
Yeah,
of.
it doesn't function very well, but if I can help anywhere,
Yes.
just see if you can shoot those names over that you're dealing with.
Well, that
'Cause
would be
I'm
fantastic.
getting the complaints, I mean, as
Yeah.
my day job.
Yes.
And as a council member, so it's coming from both sides.
That was the plan.
Oh, that's why. They're like, you can call them twice if you want, for two different reasons.
Fair enough. To be perfectly, this is a problem intersection. This is an intersection that I've been talking about in the 11 years that I've been with the city. I've talked to the president of Industrial Chemical Company and every other business along that corridor, specifically around this. And to be perfectly frank, one of the reasons why we did this sub-area plan in partnership with Adams County was to look at this intersection to see what can be done. When we originally kicked off this plan, there was a little bit of hope that there would be more of this land that could be pulled out of the floodway. But after working with the Mile High Flood District through this process, we don't believe that that is as optimistic as we thought about 2 years ago. So that becomes problematic. So even the land that you see really in the near term would be captured through a development process in order to get some of that right away and work in partnership with Adams County. We wanted the plan first in order to be able to do that. But given the fact that that land is going to more likely than not remain in floodway, it makes it that much more complicated. And then you don't have the development there in order to help bridge some funding gaps in order to get to where we are. So at this point in time, the funding is probably going to be more local government and state government financed as opposed to development facilitated because of the lack of developability of that land.
But we could always, we can change the intersection, say near-term design, and say we leave it, but can't we go back on the developers and have some fee associated to that because we proactively developed that? I remember something like with that, what's the apartments by your house? What's the name of that place? West? The ones we don't like? I'll say it.
West Town.
There you go, West Town. Remember how it used
There's
to get
a
narrow?
traffic impact fee, yes.
Yeah,
that we,
and then it would go wide, and we said, look, just straighten it out. And I remember Chris Daly saying, well, we can, and then we can associate it to the development later.
that is true. However, though, usually there's a time frame for that. It's usually 10 years. And the likelihood of the Square Lake Central area by this plan being developed or changing any time in the next 10 years is not very likely because of the floodway issues.
Okay, well, we'll try to solve, because I mean, our current businesses, and I think even some of the employees as well as some residents are, you know, starting to, and whatever we can try to do to coalesce a conversation and some
Absolutely.
collaboration to get somewhere. While we were talking, I was trying to, and folks, I'm using my phones, I don't have a computer anymore, it died on me before I got down here, but to look at some of this presentation, but I have something teed up to go talk to the traffic engineers to see if we can just get that light to do something different for a while. For a while.
In the very near term, even before road construction, just having a conversation about the timing of the light, protected lefts, those types of things could probably go a long way of at least alleviating some of the pain points.
Yeah, because I mean, I want our employers and employees of this area to be not so frustrated to get out on Sheridan.
Absolutely.
Every day.
They're actually performing dangerous acts because some of the truck drivers will get out, they'll push the pedestrian button
Yes, I
in
heard.
order to extend green lights and then get back in their trucks.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, I'll coordinate with city staff and team if I can get something done in the short term
That'd be great.
to get something fixed. But I'm glad it's in the plan because it's important to our employment center.
Great. Mr. Mormon.
Thank you for your presentation and your work on this. I had a conversation with Daniel Riley of AIDA recently about this particular area. My interest especially is in the developing more employment centers in this area. I think the location of the Gold Strike Station is really attractive to do that. And in particular, I'm really interested in clean tech and green tech and bringing those kind of industries to Arvada and looking at that location. So I'm just curious what land is available for that? I know the floodplain and that's a big issue, but what is available to be starting to look at that?
The Gold Strike Station does not include the floodway or the floodplain. So that is not included in that area. It's primarily located in the central area and predominantly in the Adams County portion. I am not aware, we have worked closely with Economic Development, Daniel, about this plan, and we are very conscientious of keeping that employment opportunity within the mixed-use land uses that are preferred on this plan. I am not aware of any specific properties. I do want to note that, and this was presented in our last workshop, is RTD has no immediate plans, but they have had some general discussions of potentially changing underutilized parking areas, and this is one of them, into residential or providing housing. So that's why we felt it was important to provide some sort of a conceptual alternative that may anticipate that type of development on their property.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Ms. Smith.
Thanks for that presentation. I appreciate it. One of the questions I had, I saw with mixed-use residential and mixed use, it didn't show any green spaces, any parks. And I looked in the details, and it also didn't say that. All we saw was that floodplain open space right next to Clear Creek. Is there going to be more space for some parks or open areas in the Gold Strike area?
That can always be included in development. Our land development code includes in many areas urban park requirements, so that's a component that can be included within a development for it. We did, as part of this plan, there are quite a few parks and trails within proximity of the square area, of the Square Lake area, and the community felt they had enough parks and potential and trails within the area, so the focus was primarily on connections to those existing parks. But does not preclude some kind of green space or open space or pocket park or some kind of consideration in future development in the area.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Simpson.
Thank you. Actually, just a quick thought to the RTD, potentially with the underutilized parking. If and when RTD's traffic volumes still get back to pre-pandemic levels and potentially over, one of the things we had been discussing prior to the pandemic and the shutdowns was potentially charging in the Old Town Garage in order to, because those spaces were filling up significantly. And just knowing this part of town and this part of the district, a lot of the people who commute out of the Old Town station live east side, and if Old Town eventually does start charging, they're going to go to Gold Strike.
Okay.
So just a thought to pin there is they will move, at least a significant number will move, and that could up the demand for parking at Gold Strike Station, and then as well as if we have more economic opportunities in that space. Now, obviously, that's all kind of future casting, but one of my thoughts about that area. And then two, I agree, we have, Clear Creek Valley Park, we have Tennyson Knolls Park in that area, so I'm excited to see some of this more mixed use and commercial development. My thought is more about the crossings. I had mentioned this once a little over a year ago. Even with the button, Sheridan Avenue is terrifying to cross. Is there any consideration to perhaps like a small pedestrian bridge or something to move people from across that Sheridan line across to Jeffco to Adams?
Do you mean across Sheridan Boulevard itself?
Yes.
No, there was no discussion of that. However, the complete streets, some of the concept plans in there included pedestrian and bicycle improvement designs to facilitate that better. It was recognized, however, it's under CDOT jurisdiction. And we worked quite a bit with CDOT. They were very receptive in working with us in creating those complete street concepts. So that was the approach, not a pedestrian bridge.
Okay, and that's great, yeah, it's just a pretty critical, especially if we're looking at doing some housing on the Jeffco side of the plan, which I think is awesome for the revitalization down there, as well as live, work, play. So just one of my thoughts about how we can keep Sheridan slightly less terrifying to walk across.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Devon, anything else you need from us on this?
No, thank you very much for the feedback.
Very good. We can then start our second.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you very much.
The second item, I believe, will be, it's like Rob Smetana, Planning Manager, will begin the presentation of the Land Development Code amendments.
Okay, Rob, you drew the short straw on this one, huh?
All right, well, we're here to talk about a second round of amendments to the Land Development Code. As you know, we can move on to the next slide, please. As you know, we did a bulk of the approvals on March 21st, but there were several items that the council in past workshops had asked for us to bring back for further consideration. So that's what we're looking at here tonight. So I'll quickly run through those, and of course, feel free to interrupt me as we go through. Next slide, please. The first topic is the notification radius for items, whether they're administrative or public hearings. The current radius is 500 feet. The proposal from staff is to increase that to 1,000 feet for sites under 5 acres in size, and to 1,500 feet for sites 5 acres or more in size. That then gives the notification a little bit of scale with the projects as well. But there would also be a provision that would allow the director to reduce those for small items or those with limited impacts. A couple of recent hearings you've had were for some major modifications that really didn't affect a large area. Those would potentially be some cases where that notification area could be reduced. We had the fence major modification. Even the car wash modifications maybe don't affect a huge area. Those might be some examples.
Rob, do we have some sense of how many more residences would be notified? This more expanded?
You know, it does go sort of exponentially. I did look at one item. It was the Clear Creek apartment building that's Ralston and Garrison. I think we notified somewhere around 80 people with the 500-foot radius, and it jumped to about 300 with a 1,000-foot radius. I don't know that I looked at 1,500 feet on that one.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions on this one? Do you want us to sort of give you some sense?
Sure.
Why don't we do that just
Okay.
one by one? Is the sense that this one makes sense? Good?
Yeah.
Okay, we're good with that.
All right, sounds good. All right, next slide, please. There were some questions in the past about conditional use approvals, primarily when it came to residential projects. So we've proposed a couple of changes surrounding those. The first one would be to add a condition of approval that would talk about that there could be some minor deviation from the concept plan that the council would approve related to residential units. I think when we brought it to you the last time, we were talking about a 10% deviation as a possibility. We've looked at that again and are now proposing a 5% deviation. That would allow maybe the building doesn't change, but the unit mix within the building might change. And so that allows a little bit of flexibility as somebody moves from a conceptual plan to a more developed site plan. And then the second piece of that would be to have a condition that talks about that the site plan needs to be substantially similar to the conceptual plan that's approved with that flexibility in the units.
Mr. Marriott?
So, Rob, I have a question for you on that. So, the term substantially similar is what gives me some pause there. You know, do we have a clear definition of that, of what that is or not? And so, just as a bit of background, this particular provision has been one of the things that's been most troubling to me, because I think I've always conceived of it as, and I think a lot of our residents think of it this way too, is these conditional use approvals are specific. They're specific to a certain plan. But there's also the other school of thought, maybe favored by the development community, that a conditional approval is general. Can we build residential here or can we not? If the answer is yes, and we do it, you know, we can do it however we want, versus, you know, here's our plan that includes residential for this. This is what we're going to build.
Sure.
And so when we get to trying to do something like this, we get to things like substantially similar. And so I wonder what, you know, how's that defined? And then who gets to be the one who decides, okay, I think this is substantially similar. Meanwhile, someone else might say, wait a minute, this is totally different.
Sure, and understanding that, and that's why we tried to put some guardrails in there, especially with the unit count. That means they can't really go from, you know, a townhome to a multifamily or from a multifamily to a townhome. That's likely not going to work with that type of mix. You know, substantially similar is a little vague, but we wanted to have a little bit of wiggle room to make those determinations, and it would ultimately be the director. But, you know, we did have a recent case, 52nd and Marshall, where we did bring that back to council and to say, okay, you did approve a conditional use. Here's a design. In that case, it was a substantially different design. Same idea, but the council then directed us to say, hey, go back for another conditional use approval. So, you know, there are several mechanisms that we can work on to make sure that we're following your direction.
Right. So that case is a perfect example to me about maybe the right way of going about it, which is if there's any change that it goes back to the council for the council to either say, yeah, to us that's substantially similar, or to us, no, that's not substantially similar. Because I don't recall, or I don't know if the city team even gave us what their opinion of that project was, but you know, it was relatively similar, I think, in unit count, but the shape or the way the project was built out was quite different to me. And so, you know, like that's a great example of, would you call that substantially similar, or would you call it dissimilar? I don't know. I know for me, I know what I would call it, but how would council know whether that was substantially similar or not?
So,
well, I think,
Mr. Marriott, are you calling for council to make that determination instead of the director?
Yeah,
Would that be the way to?
I think that's exactly right. I think that so, or maybe even a little more detailed, like, you know, if a project comes to us that we approve a conditional use on, and then the applicant, as they go to refine and get their final development, they're using, let's call it the same footprint, but like the unit count is slightly different because they organize the units differently, or they do more studios or more two-bedroom, whatever. I don't have any problem with that, you know, with the unit count varying when the footprint is the same, but it's when the footprint changes, when that's the one that to me is more troubling, because that has the effect of changing the look, the function of the product much more than just whether there's 205 units or 196 units. To me, that doesn't make much difference. But
and I think staff would definitely agree with you on that. I think where we wanted a little bit of flexibility was maybe they present to you it's essentially the same building, but they present to you one palette of materials, and they switch to a slightly different palette of exterior materials. Then we would say it would be substantially similar. But I think we're always going to err on the side of caution. If there's any kind of change in footprint that's more than a few feet, or you know, a design that goes from, in that instance, a podium parking situation to a structured parking situation, I think we're going to flag anything that's like that.
It's different from that. Okay. Okay. I think that's fine. I guess I would use maybe some different language than that, maybe a little more detailed, but
Okay.
I think we're on the same page. It's
Okay,
just-
yes, we can definitely work on that before we bring it back
Right.
to you.
Okay.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
Maybe you can give some more examples of where you would use this. Like, give me some more examples of what substantially similar would mean to you, other than just material of it. I mean, because
Sure.
to me, I think I want to know what it looks like, not only footprint, but what it looked like and setbacks. I mean, obviously those would change if the footprint would change. But, you know, if you change something that was not compatible, I know that's changed in our world, but let's just say it's not compatible because it's, maybe the base of it's the same, but something up above changed. So is there something like that that happens?
Sure, I think like logically, if there's any substantial change in height more than a few feet, that would probably be something to bring back to you. I think something that we would think is, you know, substantially similar is maybe it's some surface parking and they rearrange the parking in a slightly different way. You know, we try to always bring to you, at least conceptually, a landscape plan so you can kind of get an overall feel for the project. Something like that, if it tweaked a little bit, we would probably say would be substantially similar. But anything that would significantly change a design or height or bulk, I think we would most likely bring back to you, unless there was some really good reason for them to do that.
Yeah, and maybe in the definitions, like Mr. Marriott's saying, is don't leave that word so loose. Maybe you should put some clarity.
Some parameters around it.
Yeah,
Okay.
some definition below of what that means. Just
Okay.
even for the developer, the citizens, even for us,
Sure.
so that we can say, well, these are the things that they would maybe make some judgment on, but everything else would go back to council.
Okay, sure, we can definitely look at that.
All right, thank you.
I see our legal team and others are brainstorming on this as we speak. Ms. Morris, do you have a solution?
Not necessarily a solution, so much that when the last time this came up, we kind of went around the same issue. How do we define substantially, substantial or any phrase related to that? And the conclusion we ultimately came to is that it is a term of common understanding, and although people may have different definitions for it, there's no way for us to hone it down any more than it is right now.
But you could put examples of what that means within the code. You don't have to define it so strictly, but you should say, because actually changing the parking, I would probably argue that's substantial in my eyes, because parking changes the footprint of the site. But, you know, I think you can put some examples in the code that.
We can always do that. And we can look through that and look through putting some examples in there. There will always, my struggle there is that there will always be something different come up that we do not anticipate, but we could definitely put examples in there that maybe help narrow down the field of what might be substantially
Because I don't
similar.
think if we can get this ironed out where we're comfortable, then we're going to be asking for all these to come back, right?
Potentially. I mean, if you're not comfortable with staff making that determination, that substantially similar
I think the hard part for
determination.
me is, you know, we approve something and then, I don't know, a year, 2, 3, 4 later, it's starting to get developed, just like this one on 60, whatever, 4th and, what's this car back here? I don't remember that. It is, probably everything's fine, but I don't know if there was some substantially similar changes to it that makes me feel like it's different. But, you know, I don't know. That's the thing, is you're gonna have to rehash these out with some of us if we don't recall it the way it's looking like it's going to be. Because that, we were sold a specific, you know, story under oath, and now we see some slight changes.
Especially if we know what council would most consider a not substantially similar change. I think that'll help us create those examples, because we could create carve-outs for, I mean, if you're saying parking is an issue that council is very concerned about, and a change to parking that exceeds, you know, blank would be considered outside of something that's substantially similar.
Yeah.
We could come up with some
Yeah,
examples like
especially because
that.
you know what, and I'll give another one that might popped up that we approved that I don't think is going the way I thought it would go, is the mixed use area on Indiana and 86 Parkway. There is a come and go, but you know, the side where the bank is, and there's some paired homes, I believe, right behind there. The driveway is so small that now everyone's parking on the street. I mean, it's like 6 feet. Yeah, look at the driveways that are on those houses towards the businesses. They're so small, they can't even park a truck on them. So they're parking on the street now. So now we have a narrow street with businesses that are gonna be, I'm assuming, ingress, egress out of there next to residential, and the residential has a garage with, I think it's like a 6 foot, 7 foot driveway. You might want to go look by there, Ryan, to see if that's,
I'd be happy to,
but if that changed, you know.
well,
if
we
that-
don't allow
Small driveways like that?
a 6-foot driveway.
What's our minimum on it? 'Cause it,
I mean,
We require it either to essentially have no driveway so that people can't try to
18
jerry-rig park in there, or it has to be 18 feet deep.
oh, they're not 18 feet. I'm pretty sure that is, because I
This
could
is
see the
the-
pickup trucks cannot park on there. And
This
so-
is the 5-point village.
Yeah,
of
it's right
Park-
behind
Five
where
Parks there.
the credit union, but see,
it's
to
Park
me.
Ridge development.
Ridge,
Yeah, so to me, that's, it hopefully was not classified as substantially similar, and that was changed.
Yeah, that one I'd have to go back and
And
look
look,
at.
but the houses are now built, so I don't know what are you
Well,
gonna do with that.
and that was approved by council as a PDP.
As a PDP for that design with those,
Yes.
those driveways?
Yes. So that was approved by council.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't want to digress this conversation. I'd be interested in that kind of information around those specific ones. But those are kind of the things I'm trying to think about that change that I don't remember us discussing. And maybe we didn't, because you don't always know everything we can discuss, but that development did not pan out the way anticipated. Same with West Town, didn't pan out the way we wanted as well, so. And I don't know how these variants happen with staff and us, you know, I get they're similar, but I think there might be a disconnect, and I don't know if, I'm not gonna put words in John's mouth, but I think that's kind of where he's kind of going, is little concern if things change too much or a little. We're held accountable by the citizens.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so what's next steps on these two? I think everybody's good with the 5% versus the 10 that was previously proposed, so we're good there. Sounds like a little bit more discussion on some guardrails and clarifying further substantially similar, which sounds a little bit like a little bit pregnant, but we'll continue to work on that one a little bit.
Does anybody like virtually similar?
Well, Council, I think the reality is, if there's anything that changes with developments, we normally advise you informally regarding what is going on, and then to get a sense from you, do you want to see it back or not? That's what we did with Marshall. And in fact, when we talked to you about Marshall, we actually recommended that we not go back. And you all stepped up and said, no, I think you should. So we will. And that's kind of hard to clarify in the code, but that's the practice of what we do.
Yeah, Mr. Devon, I think that worked exactly right, but there's nothing in the code that says that's the way it's got to be. That's just really good practice by your team of kind of doing the right thing. So it's, how does that get into the code where that, because a different team could interpret that differently and say, what, you know.
Well, and my bigger fear is that you're going to have some developer that's trying to say, wait a minute, it says right here that as long as it's substantially similar, then we're good to go. And we're saying, well, there's another step you got to go through, and us being able to do that step. So all subject to city council determination of whether or not we agree that it's substantially similar is in effect. Good? Okay, let's talk about fleet vehicles.
All right, next slide, please. Yes, so fleet vehicles, we've come up with a definition for fleet vehicles and then put some limitations on that in terms of the area of a site that they can be located on. So in the CG zone, which is our heavier commercial zone, there would be a 50% of the minimum parking spaces could be, I have to back up here. So you have an amount of parking that would be allowed. at a minimum, let's say 100 spaces. So this would allow there to be 50 additional spaces on that site for 150 spaces in the CG zone to accommodate fleet vehicles. Then in the IL zone, you'd essentially be able to double your minimum parking. And then on the IG, our heaviest industrial, you'd be able to have 200% of that minimum parking associated with a fleet vehicle. Then we would have a floor essentially that says, if you have anything left, if you have fewer than 25 fleet vehicles, you can do that anywhere.
Mr. Mormon?
Yes, so I have a question about this. In terms of, when we're talking about a fleet and setting these limitations, are we considering vehicles that are not owned by the property but are by contract? Because I feel like that has a serious impact on traffic, and is that going to be, in part of this calculus?
It's one of those more difficult things because if a contract vehicle, if it's a personal vehicle, it's harder to just understand what that is versus a vehicle that has a logo on it, obviously. Sometimes they do have the stickers on them that they can take on and off, but when they're on, then we would know it would be part of that system. If they are just personal vehicles that are being used, then it is more difficult to figure that out from a enforcement standpoint. So that's something we can look into in more detail, but the way this is written now, it would not necessarily address that unless it was easily identifiable as a vehicle that's used in that fleet.
Because you could have a lot of delivery trucks that are not owned by a company that's sited here in Arvada, but you could have a contract of delivery trucks coming and going, and that's going to have an impact on our roads. It's going to have an impact on our traffic, and I feel like, the whole point of this is to make sure we're looking out for our infrastructure and our traffic situation. Sure. So I really would like to see if there's what other cities are doing or how we can better account for that.
Yeah. Now, we do have the language in there about it being leased, and it would depend on how broadly we use the term leased, whether it could capture that or not.
Yeah, I'd like you to look into that more, please.
Councilmember Mormon, I'd just like to add to Rob's description that this is also related to parking, and so it's trying to understand if those contract vehicles that are coming in, if they're going to require parking as a result of their role. So, of course, contract vans or trucks or cars are going to be part of the traffic study because that's going to be part of the overall operations, and that would be accounted for in the normal development process. What this is getting at is, are those contract folks coming in and are they part of the fleet that's parking there, or are they just coming in for pickup and then leaving? And there's a little bit of a nuanced difference there about whether or not that fleet is parked there overnight, or if they have contract fleet that comes in and is using the road and is subject to traffic studies and those types of things, but not necessarily utilizing the parking that is required for the business.
Right, and I understand that, but I guess too, I'm thinking like, a contract driver, while we think they're coming and going and not needing a parking space, they may actually need a parking space to do other things there, or just use the restroom, you know what I mean, or something like that. So I feel like we need to think about more than just them coming and going, that they actually have more of an impact than we might be looking at.
Ms. Simpson?
Thank you. Mine was actually going to be about contracted vehicles as well. So this is largely already addressed. I just wanted to say that my sense is it's better to have and not need than need and not have. So maybe we put contracted in here as well. That ideally keeps most business owners, or ideally all business owners, playing by the rules and doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, which I believe most would anyways. And then if and when it becomes an issue, we have it in there already so that we don't have to revisit this conversation and they go, well, it wasn't in there. So better to have and not need than need and not have.
Okay.
So add contracted in addition to leased, or?
Yes.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
I want to make it more difficult. I wouldn't put contracted in it because we're talking about a fleet. Contract's not fleet. I mean, at the end of the day, they're not part of your fleet. No, because if you hire an Uber driver to pick up your groceries and take it, that's not the fleet to the business. And so why should another business be penalized because of a fleet definition with parking because they're doing business? So I don't see that, because this is about fleet. And what I appreciate what the team has done here is the minimum parking spaces, because in the scenario we're probably all referencing, they put in 6 times the minimum requirement. You now have put a limit that it's 100% of the minimum parking. So in that scenario, I think it'd been 1/6 of the fleet vehicles that would have been allowed, even though they overparked their facility. Does that make sense? So I think it addresses our need and puts a cap on fleet vehicles being used for it. So I am not in favor of putting contracted, because 1, it's not something we're going to be able to enforce. And 2, I think you're going to end up disqualifying parts of our business community that does other things, Grubhub to Uber to, that have maybe supporting this business, but they're not parking there. I don't see an Uber person leaving their car there overnight and using one of those parking spaces. So leased vehicles, that includes getting Penske and U-Haul and other things, that's different. But that is not what a contracted driver in their vehicle does. So I would not put that in.
Ms. Simpson, do you want to discuss this point further?
Yes, so my contradiction to that is I agree. I don't foresee Uber or Grubhub becoming the issue, but there's different kinds of contracted vehicles. There's actually a lot of contracted private delivery drivers, and I think that's more the ones we're trying to get out here. I don't think, my Uber Eats driver that's at a restaurant for 5 minutes to grab my order is going to be the one that's hitting code enforcement for us.
Well, I don't think there's as many contracted drivers with a unmarked vehicle showing up as much as the fleet of the business themselves. Because in the scenario we're referring to with that company, they have branded fleet vehicles that are parked and shows the magnitude of what they're going to do. Somebody coming in to deliver office furniture who has a leased vehicle for that building shouldn't be penalized because they are a contracted delivery of assets. And so I think you're going to get into a slippery slope defining what is that contract driver doing. And now your definition is bled beyond what a fleet vehicle is. You're now getting into, well, I saw this truck show up and park in your dock. Well, yeah, they were delivering furniture to my office, and I hired them to pick up the furniture and deliver it, and now I'm going to get dinged because I had one extra vehicle in there because I was doing my business. I think it's too much for the staff to try to police that. It's too much to try to do definition. I think it's a stretch of what a fleet vehicle is, and I would be against it. So I would rather stay with the staff recommendation on this.
Perhaps then we use something along the lines of, regular or recurringly contracted or something, because I agree, there shouldn't be a penalization for one-offs, and nor do I think there ever would be. I don't foresee any neighbor calling about, the delivery truck that was delivering furniture, just like how none of us ever call about moving trucks in our neighborhood.
Can we bet?
Okay, that's probably, there's going to be one, you're right.
Yep. So I just, remember the definition of fleet vehicle. The key word is fleet vehicle. That means owned or leased, not contracted.
Perhaps regularly contracted then.
So, yeah, I'm staying with what you guys put up here. That's where I stand.
Mr. Marriott, do you have anything you want to add to this discussion?
Well, no, just slightly. I was going to just weigh in on it. I agree with Mr. Pfeiffer about that. The object here is to define fleet vehicles, number one, and then number two, place limitations on them, which changes what can be built in any of these zones. And I think this does a very good job of it. And I don't think the intention of this ever was to catch how many interactions that a business may have with vehicles that are coming and going as part of the business. So I think I support this just the way it's written. I think it's done fine, and would be supportive of it just the way it is.
Ms. Smith?
So if vehicles were insured by the business, would that be considered fleet? Meaning if I had a personal vehicle but I was using it for work and I had my company insure it, would that be considered a fleet vehicle?
Maybe a little bit of a legal question, potentially. I'm not
Did I stump you?
I don't think under the current definition, and that would be, again, be a situation where that would be impossible for the city to enforce. So
Yeah.
my kind of just off the cuff answer would be no, that just because an employee has insurance from their company, that it wouldn't be necessarily fleet, but we can look more into that and try to get you a better answer.
I think the issue really comes down here to, is the vehicle being used as a fleet vehicle, regardless of how it's titled and owned? Not as, is it delivering for other things or having some other use that's outside the fleet usage? So, you know, I'm comfortable with it being as the team has presented it, maybe with just some expansion of and I think it does that. Utilize vehicles to deliver goods to customers, provide off-site services, or for sales representatives to travel to clients. So I think it's covered within the definition. So I think we're good, myself. Of course, we're all going to get to vote on this, so. Does that give you enough direction on that? Count enough noses to say, go forward with the way it is now, and then we'll see how the final vote, we'll see what Mr. Jones does to it when he's with us, okay?
Can we real quickly just go through, just tease this out a little bit more? So I'm trying to think of our other businesses that uses contracted fleet services. Could be some of our manufacturing that's in the same area, right? There's some fab buildings, I believe, that are being made, and they use contracted fleets to move. Are we impeding that business of doing their work? Because they're captured within the number of vehicles coming and going from the business. That's how we approve them. But then as this definition going, if we were to add contracted fleet services, which is 18-wheelers showing up to pick up a vehicle or their fab business, are we talking out of both sides of our mouth? You know, we said it's under the count, but now if we added contracted, now are we saying you can't really do that under
Well, but
fleet?
we're excluding semi-trailer trucks anyway.
Oh, yeah, well, but, I mean, I'm using that as an example of a business relies on some sort of fleet possible services that if this is, definition grows too big, you might actually impede the business unknowingly. So I think we need to be cautious about how we define it and not scope creep it up to a point where we start working on or start chipping away at businesses that exist today that use something that may accidentally be defined within this. That's all I'm saying.
First of all, are we already grandfathering in existing businesses? So I guess that's a question for the city team.
Yeah, anything that would exist prior to the adoption of this would become non-conforming and would still be legal. but
Permissible non-conforming.
Yeah.
And do we need to have a discussion with the Economic Development Association and sort of do a survey of you know, our existing businesses? I mean, I don't think there's any secret that this was aimed to make sure that we didn't have another situation of somebody coming forward with an Amazon-type project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I agree, and I think it meets it, because 100% of minimum parking was my biggest gripe about that, because it was 6 times the minimum parking. And if you use this 100% minimum parking, it completely disqualified their business model. So I think it meets exactly how to prevent one of those massive distribution centers to be in our zones. So I think it does a great job, and I'd rather put this in and see what public hearings end up popping up, because if they want a variance from this, they're gonna have to come in front of us, right?
Yeah, anything
So-
beyond these numbers would go
Right.
to a major
And these
modification
restrictions
to the
alone are
before.
gonna define that, so I think that if somebody has a beef with them, they'll come in front of us, and then we can decide what that means and put some
Case-by-case
restrictions
basis.
on it. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Next slide then, please. All right, semi-trailer truck trip. We went back and we're now defining it or proposing to define it as an inbound and an outbound movement would be individual trips, and therefore that would be essentially 2 trips.
I think that is an improvement.
So we did survey our existing businesses that have significant truck traffic, and here's the numbers you get. That's the one way in, one way out. So as you can see, that maxes out with Sundyne at their peak trips of having 64. So that'd be 32 trucks, one in, one out. So that just kind of gives you a number of what's out there today. And are there any questions on the definition before we go to the next slide? Everybody's good with that?
Mr. Mormon?
Yes, thank you. So I guess my question is, why are we calling out semi-truck, trailer truck trips and not going back to just talking about trucks and a whole fleet? Why do we need to call them out separately?
Historically, that's been because they have a bigger impact on a site in terms of site design, on roadways in terms of movements. And so those are the bigger trucks that really have a greater impact versus a smaller, more kind of panel van size vehicle. They don't have as much of an impact in terms of the actual vehicle itself. So historically, it's been about that impact.
Okay, but when we're looking at like some projects that we've dealt with recently, and it seems to me that the impact on our traffic and our roads is about the whole fleet. I mean, obviously, yes, semi-trucks do weigh a lot more, agreed. But I'm getting a little concerned about separating these out, and then what are we then leaving out when we're with the rest of the fleet? You see what I'm asking?
Well, it's sort of kind of between this piece and the last piece we just talked about that starts to enclose, what kind of vehicle traffic can come in and out of a site. So hopefully our thought was taken together and dealing with the trips here, that helps put some of those guardrails around an operation.
Okay, I'll hold off and wait till the next slide.
Okay.
All right, next slide then, please. So then after we looked at that essentially being 2 trips, we looked at how we've been interpreting it in the past. And basically we were saying you could do 50 round trips, which is 100 one-way trips. So we're looking at, based on the information we received from area businesses, essentially reducing what we were allowing in the past from that 100 trips down to 75 trips, that being the difference between light industry and heavy logistics.
Could you make that an even number?
Sure.
It just seems weird to be, like, are we parking the truck there for overnight?
Good.
So then we have a parking problem now.
Yeah, point taken.
Yeah, so make it an even number.
So 74 or 76, one of the.
Or 80 or 70, whatever.
Okay. Well, does that, somewhere in that number range
Yeah.
works, and we can just work on the even number? Okay.
Mr. Marriott.
Rob, I just have one. I think I've heard this before. It's similar to what Mr. Mormon was saying about, we're talking about semi-trailer truck trips in this particular thing. Would it be more prudent to change that definition instead of semi-trailer truck trip to trucks over a certain GVW? So it might pick up, in addition to semi-trucks, it might pick up the biggest of the, we used to call them bobtail trucks or whatever, where it was not a tractor trailer setup, but a big box, a big box truck, kind of thing. That there's probably somewhere in there, there's a gross vehicle weight thing that would capture, in addition to semis, would also include these biggest of the non-semi trucks, but maybe not include all of them, because some of them are a van front. They're like driving a van anyway, so they're not that big a deal. But there's got to be some delineation there. Okay. Would that be a better way of defining this rather than just semi?
We can definitely look into that and come back to you with some options.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That might be a creative way to look at this.
Okay.
Good.
All right. The second piece, slightly unrelated, but in terms of, we had some discussion about appeals that council might see. We aren't proposing to make any changes except to increase that notification area, and it should say to the 1,000 feet for under 5 acres, 1,500 feet for over 5 acres, 5 acres or over.
I'm sorry, going back to the semi-trailer truck trip.
Sure.
Say that really fast, right? So what I would like to see how we compare to other cities of comparable size and nature on these actual numbers of trips that we're talking about. So can that information be provided?
Certainly can, yes, yeah. Okay, next slide then. So there was concern about council, in the appeal process versus having a new hearing and really getting to be involved in what a controversial project might need some additional review. So we are proposing what we've called a call-up option for council. And this is, some other communities in the metro area use this option. And this would be after an administrative decision is made, we would transmit that information to you, either in the weekly memo or some other form. And then you would have an opportunity to look at those cases. All of the details are on our webpage and our Arvada permits. And at the next council meeting, then a council member could propose to bring a controversial case that they felt was appropriate to come to council. The way it would work in the communities that we looked at, there was then a vote. If council voted in affirmative to hear the call-up, then the case would be scheduled just as a normal city council public hearing, and council could take testimony from the public, hear from the applicant, and then make a decision on whether to approve with conditions, or deny an application. And then the last piece of that, which just ended up on the last slide, was if there was no call-up at that next business meeting, it would be deemed an approved project.
Mr. Fiver?
So is there still the blue sign or whatever, the posting on these administrative ones?
There would not be, but we would send a notice of administrative decision on those that we've talked about in the past now, that where there may be some controversy, we would definitely send a notice of the decision to be made, and that way we can get additional comment before the director actually makes the final decision. That wouldn't be the case on all of them. If it's a very small case, again, with some discretion that we had talked about, that we would not provide that notice of administrative decision, but we would provide all of that information to council.
So would we put any notices on the property? Would we ask for that if it was a call-up?
We don't put notices on the property. Oh, if there's a call-up.
The blue sign,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
yes. If there is a call-up, then
should
yes,
be,
it's just like a public hearing. It would be
so we
published.
should put the notice out there, the
and
notice
it would be
to
mailed.
the
Yep.
1,000 or 1,500 feet?
Sorry, I misunderstood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Blue sign, because the blue signs have been very, I think, beneficial than
Yes.
any other. I think people are noticing that more than those yellow posting ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a great move on our part to put that out there. So if we do a call-up, I would like to see the signs
Yes,
of the property.
the way it would be worded, if it's a call-up, it becomes a normal public hearing with all the notice requirements.
Thanks, Rob.
Sorry, I misunderstood that.
And that becomes a de novo hearing, right? It's on an appeal of the decision, and we're just simply trying to decide whether or not there was evidence to support what the director did. It would be, thank you,
yes.
Mr. or Ms. Director, for your good hard work on this, but we want to do it ourselves.
That is correct. That's
Okay.
the way other communities have set it up, yes.
Right. And so is there going to be any kind of sort of due process for the applicant or for the community in terms of, we're going to get a decision from an administrative decision, and then at our next business meeting, we're either going to thumbs up or if somebody wants to call it up, we're going to do a vote at that meeting, right? Mm-hmm. No specific notice requirement that you can think of, Ms. Morris?
No.
So no opportunity for debate from the public or the applicant as to whether or not the director's decision should be called up?
No, not at this point. So in terms of the open meetings requirement, we
Right.
do not have, we don't have to list every single thing ahead of time, assuming we don't know that for
Right.
sure whether or not it's going to come up. So I don't see an issue there. In terms of due process, the applicant and the neighbors or the surrounding property owners will have their opportunity at due process when the public hearing comes up.
Right.
So I don't think there's any additional due process that would be necessary in terms of whether or not it gets called up.
Fair enough.
And I'm sorry, just to add in, if it's chosen not to be called up, they still have the right to appeal the administrative
That's true.
decision, and then it would still come before you as an appeal.
That's true. Good point. Mr. Marriott?
Yeah, the question I have is, what's the method that council will be officially notified of administrative decisions so that, you know, we'll be under, you know, council will be under the gun that you have, you know, next Monday, if you're going to call this up, you've got to call it up. How will we know when an administrative decision has happened and the background on the case for the administrative decision, I guess would be my question.
I think the thought was initially to put it in your weekly memo. So you'd have a list of those, and then you'd be given the case number, and you could go in and look at those.
So if that were going to be the method, my suggestion would be that I'd hate to get something on Friday afternoon in a weekly memo, and it'd be, on Monday would be your only your opportunity to call it up or not, particularly if we needed information about it, because it only allows us a very short period of time just during the day Monday to be able to get information. I'd feel more comfortable if that were offset by a week, so you actually had a week to find out. And I understand not putting the development people under time crunch or under the gun, but unless there's some other way of officially notifying us of administrative decisions where we have a workable amount of time to know whether we're, you know, going to ask to call that up or not.
Well, one option, Councilmember Marriott, is that I think putting it in the weekly communication is a good way of making sure that it's documented.
Yeah.
And then, in addition to that, we could allow for a certain time frame that would give the council time to
Right.
consider whether to call it up or not.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
a 10-day period or something along those lines.
That's kind of what I think. You know, it says, you know, at the next city council business meeting, so conceivably we could get notification of an administrative decision that happens on Friday afternoon, and by Monday afternoon we'd have to be able to make a call about whether we're going to ask our fellow council members to call it up or not. Now, if it was a week where we were having a workshop instead, and we got notice of an administrative decision, well, that's not the next business meeting. We would have a week. And so it's kind of different. I just would think about making sure that we have adequate time for the process to work right.
You guys can make that happen?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
God, I love your attitude.
All right. Well, no, it's good. We
Yeah,
don't-
yeah,
as soon as we have the
I understand
concept,
exactly
we
where
can
Mr.
work.
Marriott's
Yeah,
coming
yes,
from.
I
On
understand that, yeah.
some weeks, you might get a note. So don't make
weekend,
any
yeah.
decisions on the Friday before a,
I try not to work on Fridays. You're fine.
very good.
All right, yeah, we can definitely work on that.
Good.
Okay, next slide, please. You know, the top again was just the last piece of that. And just to give you an example of how many cases we've worked through at this point, and we've only had the one appeal. So it was just to give you an idea of the scope of things we've dealt with so far, and hopefully, fingers crossed, continued lack of need to come to you with these items. Next slide, please. So short-term rentals, this was an item that the Planning Commission actually brought up when they reviewed the LDC changes. Had a couple of things they wanted to have clarification on short-term rentals. So staff has looked into those, and one of those was our current language says local contact person, and we've interpreted that more broadly, but there was some concern that we were talking with about one person who had to be available 24/7, 365. That isn't the intent, so we were going to add management company to that definition or that section of the code. And then there was some discussion about when there's a violation of some type or instance where code enforcement has been called out, that there needs to be a differentiation between what's a life safety issue and we have the right to go in immediately and check the situation versus something that, you know, is a longer term, we can schedule an appointment with the property owner to get in. So we're proposing some changes there that just kind of separate those two situations.
And this is different than, a party house where obviously the police can be brought in. This is
Yeah.
something in
This is
terms of the
something,
condition of the property
yeah.
that's a life safety issue.
Right,
Got it.
yeah.
Okay, any thoughts on these for folks, other than the confusion that the planning commission created in their motions that they made at the, on their recommendations of this, Mr. Marriott?
Yeah, Rob, I guess the question I would have on the second piece of this about right of immediate entry, does that exist, and maybe our legal team, does that exist in non-short-term rental property in Arvada?
Yes, the language I've looked at would be actually the exact language out of our property maintenance code and our building code.
Okay.
There's a right of entry for purposes of life safety, and that was always the intent of the short-term rental, was to separate out the
Right.
life safety with the just having an inspection for purposes of having a license.
Okay, but we don't have an inspection for purposes of having a license, do we?
It's in the ordinance that
Okay.
a property can be inspected, and they do agree to that when they
Okay.
when they apply for the license. So all of this has been, they've initialed off kind of on every single part of our ordinance that they agree to it. The planning commission just wanted us to be a little more specific, so it didn't
On
seem like we were
this.
going to send Mr. Stachelski in with a no-knock warrant to, inspect properties on his whims.
Well,
He doesn't work on Fridays, so.
for some people staying in a short-term rental, a dishwasher not functioning could be a life and safety issue, so you never know. All right, thank you.
I don't see any other questions on that, so.
Okay,
Oh, wait, Ms. Smith.
Just a clarifying question. So some of the short-term rental platforms like Airbnb offer open homes. So for like refugees or people that are not paying to rent there, does this include licensing for that? Meaning if you're not using a short-term rental for income, does that still require licensures and these regulations?
Yes, we haven't run into that in the practical sense, but because it's still being used as a short-term rental, I mean, I assume it kind of just depends on how if they're advertising on one of those platforms, the idea is that they would have a license, but if they're not receiving any money for it, then I guess it wouldn't necessarily fall into our definition.
I was just trying to think that through as well,
Yeah.
where we call this a business use of the home, that isn't necessarily a business use of the
Right.
property at that point in time, so, yeah.
So I don't think anything in our ordinances would prohibit someone from offering a free, for like the refugee situation. I don't think anything in our ordinance would prohibit that, because this license does tie closely to our business license.
Okay.
And it does require that there's some sort of payment, or the expectation is that there's a payment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
next.
Next slide, please. And last one here, we've already kind of talked through all these things. We'll look at the number, but this is just revising the definitions to kind of align with the other topics we've discussed here today. So that is it.
Very good, Mr. Pfeiffer.
I'm sorry, but can we go back just to Fleet real quick, just for a quick second? So if we limit the parking and the trips in and out of the fleet, is that assessment done through the traffic study, and that will be presented to us during usually hearing, and then that's the point where we can determine through the traffic study. I mean, I don't believe them sometimes, so I know they're the expert, but I still don't believe them.
That's fine.
But that's our opportunity to talk about traffic flows and traffic impacts.
Number of vehicle trips in a day going back and forth, yes. Because you could have a fleet of 25 vehicles, but it's a pizza chain. And so they're going back and forth,
Yeah, every 15 minutes or
every,
whatever.
20 minutes, or you can have, we leave in the morning and we go. So the traffic study would pick up that distinction as opposed to just saying you have 25 vehicle fleet.
Because that has a different impact on our roads.
It does.
And traffic mitigation issues and stuff, because, yeah, I mean, a Domino's love my Domino's, so I'm not gonna use them in a negative way, but they move, they're busy people, and
It's
so.
part of
it's
the
a different
business model.
impact. Yeah. Okay, all right.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. That
Rob,
was it.
Ryan, Mr. Devon, do you have what you need from us on this?
Think so?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Rob says yes, so we do.
Very good. We'll be anxious to see how it all comes back to us. I know we've got some members in the public here tonight. Thank you for being here. You'll certainly want to participate at the public hearing phase if you wish, when we get to that. And we did receive your email today, so we'll be considering all that as well. Mr. Devon, anything else you have for us tonight?
Nothing else.